I wanted to touch quickly on the penultimate chapter of the book, which I think if any chapter is going to perhaps rile up some of the people who might already agree with you on most of the rest of the book, it would be that, because you go into how this dynamic of gift and receptivity can be lived out in modern situations where the husband and wife determine that it might be better for the family, for the wife to work outside the home, or even for the wife to be the primary breadwinner for the family and have the husband stay home and watch the kids. And without getting like too mired into the details of that, and referring specifically to that latter situation, the rare situation where they might discern that it's better for the wife to be the primary breadwinner, at least for a significant period of time, and the husband stay home with the kids. You talk about sort of the ways that gift and receptivity between the husband and the wife, respectively, can be lived out even in that situation. But I'm curious what you think, how you'd respond to this. My observation that my experience reading that, and the amount that you talk about the way that like sort of almost countermeasures need to be taken to preserve that gift and receptivity dynamic in such a situation. The impression I got reading it was more that like, boy, this is just a really undesirable situation. Like maybe there are some situations in which that's best for a certain amount of time, especially if obviously if the husband is, just out of work or invalid or something like that. But it's like you were bending over backwards to sort of like see how that spiritual dynamic can play out in such a situation. But at the same time, just even thinking about it gives the impression that this is really better to be avoided if possible. Is that something you had in mind consciously when writing that section, or were you just sort of going for the limit with that?
That's a good question. The truth is, and in my first draft of the book, I kind of touched on it. And my editor said, the truth is, we really want you to expand on that because there are so many people in that situation. What do you have to say to that situation? So I had to kind of dig deep and really try to, I hope, give it the best treatment that I could. Because again,
Right.
even that very discernment that we're going to have an arrangement that's, maybe non-traditional, right? That
Right.
decision in itself needs to be ultimately made by the head of the family. And I do talk about that so that we're assuming that he is assessing, he and she together, of course, but that this really is best. And I will say this. Yes, I probably did bend over backwards because I don't think that should be handled lightly. But nonetheless, if you're going to have a non-traditional situation, you got to make sure this marriage is rock solid. And so trying to really kind of dig deep and look at the ways in which we make sure that we can really affirm one another according to the natural modes of affirmation. I just felt like I kind of needed to do that rather than just kind of say, well, they can figure it out. Because I do think that, we have to put a lot into it. But one reason I think that I am grateful that they asked me to write this chapter was because, again, so many young people today that are getting married, so many of them are growing up in homes where they don't necessarily have the model of a unified marriage. I mean, look at the statistics.
Right.
And so that is going to be one huge way in which a woman and a man feel the confidence to sort of step into these more traditional roles. And if they're not there, it can be actually a lot harder. And I know, of women who really, really struggle and are afraid of sort of being the stay-at-home mom because they didn't have it modeled well. They have many scars and wounds, and they're scared. And they have a certain
Right.
confidence in the job that they have been doing, the career that they have prepared for, or whatever. That doesn't mean we can't stretch ourselves, and it doesn't mean we can't decide, but these kids actually really need me right now. I got to just do it. Depends on the situation, of course. And that's, again, part of the headship role there is not just assessing how the wife is feeling, but how are the kids doing in this situation. So
Right.
I think that it's difficult. I think what the family needs to flourish is the presence frankly, of both parents, right? I mean, there was a time in earlier cultures where fathers didn't go somewhere to work. They weren't traveling 6 days a week. You know, they were
Right.
somewhere on the property. And it doesn't mean you spent all day with dad, but certainly sons could learn things with their dads and from their dads in ways that
Yeah.
you actually have to make intentional efforts to do now. You know, like, hey,
Right.
if you travel all the time, maybe, you know, one weekend you should, I don't know, maybe make a table with your boys. And we actually have to make more intentional efforts to do things that used to happen more naturally. So I think it goes both ways in terms of the culture and what it's done to the
Right.
family. So
Yeah, and I agree
yeah,
with that. And that idea of a father closer to the domestic setting is very appealing to me as
yeah,
well. And by the way, to be clear, I think it's good that you wrote this chapter
yeah,
as detailed as you did, because there are people who are in that situation through genuine need and need that guidance.
yeah,
But at the same time, I think it's kind of cool the way the chapter turned out, because in our age, especially in matters like this, everybody in and outside of the church wants to take the exception or the edge case and use it to
make the rule.
to disintegrate the rule. And the way that you discussed it, dealing with all of the potential difficulties in such a scenario, really, it kind of counteracts that tendency, because it makes people see, well, do I really want this that badly? That sounds like it might be more trouble than it's worth, frankly, unless it's truly
Right, because it's
necessary.
going to take a lot of
Or
work.
this might be, we might want to make this arrangement as temporary as possible.
Exactly.
Because yeah. So the way that you wrote it, it doesn't do that thing that people do where they make it sound like, well, one sort of situation is going to be as common as the other.
Yeah, yeah. And I think ultimately, too, uh, something that Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedicta, um, she, in one of her essays, was talking about basically all of the gifts that women have that they can bring to the world at large, and how the professional world, the public world, they need a woman's touch, so to speak. They need a woman's attention to the concrete and to the person, and we can be a great leaven and counterbalance, and all these things. So women can do anything, but what that also means, and what she also stresses, and what I like to stress, is just because we notice that the woman's gifts, her maternal gifts, they help the world at large. They were designed for the family. And if anything in the world needs a woman's touch, it's the family. And somehow we lost that. And we think as a culture, women can do anything. And somehow we just kind of leave the family in the dust. Women's gifts are especially needed in the family. But again, because in a particular way, because so many women have been deprived of that in their own home, a lot of them don't have the confidence, and there's a whole host of issues aside from just economic issues that that I tried to take into account, and I hope that the chapter is well received, and that it, at least there was an attempt on my part to have a great sensitivity and not to try to alienate people, and really encouraging people to have good marriages is an incredible gift that you can give to your family, and it will give an incredible stability to their children, if you can pull it off.